Hello, everybody, and welcome to another one of these live stream evenings with myself, Sam Gregory, and I'm very delighted to welcome back Astrid McGechan. Astrid, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Hi, Sam.
It's I think you're the first person I've had on twice, although I may have just offended someone else who I've had on twice. I should probably have done some homework. But thank you, everybody out there, if you're joining us as ever. It's become a bit of a regular session, this, haven't it, every Tuesday evening. And like ever, if you can drop us a little note in the comments, let us know where you are. That's really fun for us to see where all of you guys are tuning in from. I suspect if you're in the UK, it's extremely windy wherever you are. But if it isn't, let us know. And if you're somewhere further afield, then let us know that as well. So actually slightly different this evening in that we're doing a couple of locations. And that's because one of them is a one-day trip that Astrid does, and the other one is a multi-day, but not a long one. So we thought it'd be quite nice because there's some interesting aspects of these locations that sort of cross over and complement each other in lots of ways as well. So as we are showing here, we're going to be doing Bruges and York, and Astrid is going to be showing us some of her fantastic images from both of those, and we'll get into that in a moment or two. Just as I do a little bit of housekeeping at the beginning, and welcome everybody who's joining on. In terms of what we've got coming in the next few weeks, Astrid is obviously here tonight to do Bruges and York. Next Tuesday, we're going to Holland / the Netherlands / the Kingdom of the Netherlands / whatever is politically correct to call it. And that's with Sue Bishop, who we have had on before. We were doing some flowers of Switzerland with Sue, and her partner in this is Charlotte Bellamy, who actually lives over in Holland, I believe. And they're going to be talking to us about some of the scenes in Holland that we could expect to see. And then finally, Tuesday, 8th of September, we are doing a first of our creative interpretation webinars. And so what that's going to be is myself and the fabulous Adrian Beasley, and we are going to ask you to send in your raw files, okay? Images you might find difficult, images you're not quite sure how you think about interpreting them, images you love, it can be whatever you want. And at the end of tonight, I'm going to share the link for that, where you can upload your raw files. And then Adrian and I will pick a few out and we will walk through some edits. And we're both going to, no doubt, take them in different ways. And that might be quite interesting as to show all the different ways you can edit. So that's what's coming up next. But let's get on to tonight. And as ever, I will point out, if you have any queries at all throughout the course of this chat, be it technical things, be it location-based things, do let me know, and I will try and pick them up as we go. And hello to everyone who's coming in. Oh, we've got somebody in Brussels. We've got Northern Ireland. We've got someone in Bruges.
Fantastic. In Bruges,
yeah. Windy, Hampshire, Bath, the Sussex coast. Great to see some familiar names here. Newark-on-Trent. And the Black Isle. Fab. Lynn's still up there alive in the Black Isle in this weather, which is great. Right, that's enough of me chatting, everybody. Let's get right into it. So, Astrid, tell us a little bit, if you can. Just we're going to start with Bruges. What was it that attracted you to Bruges in particular? Because there's a lot of beautiful European cities, but why Bruges?
Yeah, Bruges is really, I always wanted to go and visit Bruges, and I did so a few years ago with the family. And that's always not the best time to take and make photographs. So I went again just on my own a little later, and discovered just how wonderful Bruges is. It's a dream for a photographer, really. And it's a medieval city, so it's one of the best preserved medieval cities in Europe. It's got fabulous architecture. It's got waterways, canals, more than 80 bridges. I don't know how many Venice has got, perhaps more, but it's not lacking much. It's got windmills, it's got cobblestone streets, spires, everything is there. And it's just such a multifaceted city that is just fabulous to photograph. It's really exciting, and I think going to visit at that time of year, late in the year, will be a treat.
So yeah, actually, I'm glad you mentioned the time of year, because this particular trip and I think a couple of your visits before have been sort of back end of November, early December. So we're going to see a little bit of the character of the place in one or two of the images coming up. And as ever, we've got a couple of little simple, easy polls to take part in if you're watching live and it shows on your device. Quick poll here: have you been to Bruges? Person in Bruges I think we know what you're going to answer. Pierre, you're allowed to say yes. So that's just a little one to get us going. So you've mentioned there about the sort of multifaceted kind of nature of the place, and that can be interesting photographically. It can also be slightly challenging. But we've got a few images up at the front here, which are multiple exposures, and I know that's something you enjoy doing. But I think specifically here, it made sense, and it was an interesting creative way to deal with what was in front of you. So can you just unravel that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, so perhaps it's quite an unusual image to start with, but it's one way for me to just basically capture the many elements that characterize the city. And two in particular here, we have the architecture and the water with the reflections. And I find that when so many elements play together and they are interlinked, they've grown together, and they are so characteristic for the city, that I found it just, for me, it captured the character much better than a straight image would ever have done. So here I combined the shot of the architecture, which is specifically one of the roofs of the houses, with the water reflection. Interesting fact about the roofs, and I hope, Pierre, in Bruges, I say that correctly, the number of steps in the roof is an indication of the wealth of the owner who built it, or who had it built. So the more steps, apparently, the wealthier the owner was. So it's fascinating to see this. And when you walk around Bruges, you see loads of different versions of it, and it's just very, very characteristic of the city. So sometimes I really like combining two of the elements that, for me, say Bruges or say a particular location, and in this case it was the water and the architecture of the houses.
Well, you won't be surprised to know I have 0 steps in my roof, so I'm not quite sure what that says about me. It's misspent Tuesday evenings, obviously.
Maybe it's continent specific.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
I
Fine.
know there's architecture, for example, in many of the cities along the Baltic Sea coast, Rostock in Germany, I know, and some of the Polish cities as well, probably in the Baltic countries as well. Also Stockholm, I think. So you have a lot of the seaside cities have steps in the roofs. So it's probably a continental feature. Worth investigating, I suppose.
But I think it's quite nice that, as we talked about Stockholm with you last time you were on, digging into the location a little bit more and just understanding a bit more about it is a interesting, well, it's a crucial thing to do. And then to attach that to the creative process is probably the challenging bit. But geometrically, we've talked about shape before, and I know that's something you're really strong on, and we're going to see more of that in the images. But dealing with things in this square format, for example, just banging fairly central there as well. Is it quite a joy to wrestle with that graphic shape as well?
Yes, it is. I mean, I love the square format, and I don't know how it came about, but I love the way I love symmetry, and I love centered and everything sort of straight and exact. So maybe that's one of the reasons why I like that format so much. But here in this one, you can see the triangles, and maybe I was influenced by the fact that we were there in pre-Christmas, so in early December, which meant all the Christmas lights were up and everything. And in a way, it looks a little bit like a Christmas tree, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe I was kind of influenced by that. And some of the shapes in the roof, there's 3 sort of round shapes, one above the window and one each side. They could almost look like baubles on a tree. There are obviously little round windows as well in the building, but in a way, it's a little bit of a humorous connotation probably that came from the fact that we were there around Christmas, the pre-Christmas time.
And sorry for interrupting, Astrid. Yeah, someone else has just mentioned there that reminds them of a Christmas tree. So can I just ask about the colour and just about the technical process of this multiple exposure and in camera or after the fact on the computer, and where that colour, that blue, has come from in the buildings?
Yeah, so I use I use various techniques. So sometimes I do multiple exposures, or mainly double exposures straight in the camera, but quite often, or more often, I use the overlay function in the Olympus camera. I use, which means I can pick any image that I've taken before that's on the memory card, can basically pull it up, and then put another shot that I take on top of it. So and that makes it a double. I could then use the same image of the two combined ones and could put a third over it. So there's various ways of doing it. The other way I do it sometimes is I combine them afterwards on the computer. Here I think this was an overlay, so I had the reflections were shot much earlier in the day, and then later I came across the roofs, and I thought I must combine those two elements in the shot. And the useful thing with the overlay is you always keep the single images on your memory card, so you can always go back and try again, which is useful. I know several. I mean, the Olympus can only do two images as a multiple exposure. It doesn't do any more than that. So the overlay is the alternative way of putting several images on top of each other. The color is so the blue we can see where the house is from the water, but the rest of the water is darkened when I overlaid the two images, when I merged them effectively. So it's not the true color. That it wasn't quite as blue, and the actual water wasn't quite as dark because it was daytime. So, but when you overlay them, obviously you have the exposure, the layers double, and part of it just gets darker. But I like the blue wasn't the real blue, but as the water generally is fairly blue, I thought it fits really quite well. So sometimes it's just a question of trying it out and see what you come out with. Depending on the light levels, it could be different every time we try. So there's no right or wrong way of doing it, and it's probably quite difficult to replicate. So what works one moment just won't work the next.
Yeah.
Just a lot of.
And we've got a couple of these that we just wanted to have a look at, and just different examples of them, and the effectiveness of using this. And I think, water is such a source of inspiration artistically for people, and I think photographically for a lot of us, and obviously for yourself as well, Astrid. So especially in a city where there can be a lot of bustle going around, if you can find a body of water, it can be a visual release, correct?
Yeah, I mean, water is just the photographer's dream. I don't really know any photographers who don't enjoy having a bit of water to play with, and having so much of it in the city is just a dream, because you can integrate it, you can use it. This one again is a double exposure, two images with the steepled roofs and the reflection in front. But water just gives us so many creative opportunities. We can have the reflection, just the reflection, or we can have a subject that we photograph included as well, plus the reflection. We can have a reflection which is where the water is still, so where it's fairly sharp, or if it's windy, we could use a longer shutter speed and have it fairly sort of impressionist. It just gives us so many opportunities to sort of express it the way we want or the way we feel. That is just, I love having water. The water in a city is just perfect combination.
And it's a great example of these roofs here. We can see those a little bit more literally in this particular image. I'm just going to keep us onto the next one, because we just want to introduce Charlie into it. So Charlie Waite and Astrid are doing this Bruges trip together, and I know Charlie's had some time there, and we wanted to put a couple of Charlie's images in just so we could talk about them as well, and the fact we can all see things quite differently. So I know it's difficult without Charlie here, Astrid, but do you want to tell us, how do you perceive this image, and what is it that works for you about it?
Yeah, so it's one of the many reflections that you can capture. And I remember actually standing in front of this building, only the red bit wasn't there, because this is a flag that's hanging from the building, reflected in the water, and that flag wasn't there when I was there. But I basically found the actual building which was reflected in the water. So what I love about this shot is obviously it's a reflection, it's an impression, it's you can still see what it is, which for me is always important. I don't do many photographs where I I kind of abstract it and then can't see anymore what it is. So even with a double exposure or with the reflections, or I'm always keen to be able to see at the end what it is for some reason. Maybe it's to do with, early life and food. I need to see what's on the plate. Sort of any mishmash is kind of not for me really. So this is a straight reflection. The actual subject's not in the picture, obviously, as I just said. It's above, it's a building, and we have those wherever you go in Bruges. You can have these reflections. The water is fairly still in the city, so obviously there's a few little waves which make the reflection, but it's not. At least when we were there, it's not kind of stormy in the sense that in town the water is fairly quiet. So wherever you step, you have reflections like that. All the buildings are close to the water, and it's just this was just a fantastic shot. So I thought we ought to include it.
Well,
Charlie comes along on the trip.
Yes, it's all rather Picasso for me. There's sort of eyes and noses and all sorts of weird stuff going on. So anyone who's into their impressionist painting and whatnot, they'll see where I'm going with that. I've put another little poll up while you were speaking there, Astrid, which was about multiple exposures, because and we may have asked this on one of the other talks, probably on yours actually, about how many people shoot them or not. And so of those watching, 42% do shoot multiple exposures, 58% don't. And so we're not saying obviously that everyone needs to go shoot multiple exposures all the time, but it is another tool to have in your arsenal to reinterpret somewhere, especially if you're having a slight creative stall, for want of a better word, and just to do something a little more unique. And that's something we've talked about, Astrid, isn't it? With these sorts of images, you will come back with your own set, which will be quite different time after time, and even from the person stood quite near you, they'll all be yours.
Yeah, they'll all be different, even though people may stand next to each other, because everybody sees something different. And what we'll try and do is, for each person, we'll try and kind of build a narrative. We'll build a story, because we want to sort of capture the soul of the city, the character. So we're looking for what it is that fascinates each person, which will be different for each person that goes there, and that's what we're going to try and capture. And with the multiple exposures, as you say, it's one of the tools, one of the many things that we can do, but it's a good place to practice this. If somebody is going to come along and they've never done anything like that, it's a good way to sort of get started, because it's just a fabulously suitable place for that.
Yeah.
And also with multiple exposures, you can throw any kind of pictures together, but in my opinion, they really need to fit. So the subjects really, the 2 or 3 or however many images they are, they need to gel with each other. For me, I don't think it makes much sense just throwing any or 2 pictures together and say, yeah, it's completely abstract, I've done a multiple exposure, and isn't that brilliant? When in fact, by the end of it, you don't even know yourself what it's supposed to convey. So so we're going to look into all these things, but straight reflections is just as great, and it's Bruges is just the destination of choice for that. Really fabulous.
I'm just going to key in a few of the comments. Thank you guys for everyone for putting these up, so I will pay attention to them. And just before I get, so that red is just devilish, isn't it? Oh, that's just that's what it's all about.
Maybe I'll take a flag with me myself next time. Just
just unravel it.
Yeah, exactly.
So just a couple of comments. Thank you, everyone. Grant says the Fife villages up in Scotland are famous for their Flemish-influenced architecture, all on the trade routes. And that's actually Lynn's mentioning up in the Black Isle that there's a lot of buildings with stepped gables, so that seems to be a thing. And Pierre, our friend, forgive me if I'm butchering that, our friend in Bruges, the architecture of Bruges is related to the architecture of the Hansaport commercial cities in the north of Europe.
Yeah.
So as per conversations earlier, a couple of technical things before I move us on, Astrid. is when you are photographing reflections, what shutter speed and aperture do you use to get everything sharp? I appreciate that might vary, but if you can give Lorraine a slight guide on that.
Yeah, it does vary, but for these ones, for example, that we've just seen, the reflections are sharp. So I don't want them to be chaotic in any way with this one as well. So the lines in the water are actually quite sharp. So there's a fairly short shutter speed. The aperture obviously depends on, I would want pretty much everything sharp in the image. So depending on how close I am, I will have as wide an aperture as possible to still keep it sharp. So with this, for example, I was standing on a bridge and was fairly far away. So the, even aperture of sort of f8 or so would have been enough to have everything sharp in the image, because all of it was fairly far away. If you're somewhere really close and you point your lens down, obviously, and you have something that's an area in the image that's much further away, then obviously some of it would drop off and it would get blurred. So it's a compromise of maybe zooming in more into a detail, little ripples or something, and making sure that it's sharp if it's the shapes in the water that you're after. If it's completely sort of impressionist, then obviously, it may not matter so much. You can have a longer shutter speed, and if it's the color, for example, that's what strikes you, then it's not the shape of the ripples. So I try and ask myself the question, what is it that I want to capture? And depending on the answer, I then make the decision, short shutter speed or longer shutter speed, and what kind of aperture. Do I need the sharpness, or can it drop off at some point? So it really varies, but usually probably reflections work best if they're sharp, because a reflection in a water is kind of disturbed anyway to a degree. It's very rare that you have a completely mirror-like reflection, and so if the water is disturbing it anyway to a degree, then further blurring might not work so well.
And just sorry to follow up on that, another, which I think you've probably alluded to the answer there already, but there's a question about whether you're using ND filters, and I suspect in most situations no, because that's going to render too much time on the.
Yeah. No, for reflections also, that they need the short shutter speed because they happen in a flash. It changes every millisecond. They're kind of mercurial. They're here and then they're gone. So I might even fire off lots and lots of shots just simply to get that particular shape. I mean, I tried, after I'd taken this picture that we see here, I've tried several more in the hope of getting a similar reflection with the two strong lines in the foreground, and it just simply didn't happen. So it's you have to be ready, and I don't think a longer shutter speed would have worked. So no filters in this case, and short shutter speed, and maybe even repeat firing to to make sure to get the shape.
So that's okay. So that's an interesting point. Obviously, the swan here is an excellent punctuation of color, a bit like the red flag was in the last image. And when we have that little punctuation, that can be a nice thing photographically to play with. And I love the fact it's actually up quite high in the frame, because you have got these two very strong dark lines down here, and it all comes to this. For me, this is kind of like, it feels like everything's just emanating out of here. So let's just say, and I'm conscious of the time a little bit, but this is good stuff, and I like the fact that you do this work and it can articulate about it. But you mentioned you might fire off a few frames, and so what is it you're looking for? Is it that strong graphical element of what's happening? And sometimes that's hard to say, isn't it? But we just know it works. But in this case, was it really about that shape at the bottom of those lines?
It was about the shape. I mean, the swan was a bonus. I have a number of images without it, but it just didn't come back. So it swam along, and that was it. And so it's one of those things. It happens at a moment's notice. It was there, and I was lucky that I was ready, and I saw it, and I took the shot, and that's it. And all efforts later on for another hour or so, just in vain.
That's okay. We don't tell anyone about those. It's fine.
No, I mean it's
part of the process.
One of those things. Yeah, it's part of the process, exactly. But asking the question beforehand of what you're after is useful to a degree. Of course, you want to be open-minded and look around, because there's so much in Bruges to see, and we'll get onto that in a minute, that you don't want to just focus on one thing and then miss all the rest of it. But sometimes it is useful just to ask yourself what it is that captures your attention, really.
Yeah. Okay, I will keep us moving just for the purpose of time. The final question, actually, sorry, and thank you, Angela. And I'm going to make sure I try and get to all these questions tonight, so do keep them coming. Do you use a polarizing filter on the water?
No, not usually, because I mean, I didn't want to photograph into the water, so it was perfectly fine. There was nothing I needed to cut out, no glare. It's just the reflections as they are, the golden color, and that was just.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, and thank you very much, everyone, for the questions. Like I say, keep them coming if you have any. Let's talk a little bit about the architecture and some of the themes that we've talked about with you before in terms of structure, and I mean, graphical structure within a frame here, and also, these, as Charlie would say, these diabolical curtain arrangements. And he says that because when we see repetition like this and something that's just stops us, doesn't it? Intent is a big thing. Was it that repetition, you think, that made this image interesting?
Yeah, so that's one of Charlie's shots, and I did find that same building after much searching, I must say, but the curtain arrangement had changed slightly, so he was very lucky. But the repetition is fabulous, and the combination of what at least what struck me is, so we have all the rectangles of the windows, but then we have basically the triangles that are formed by the curtains, which are within, contained within these, and everything is sort of symmetrical, except for the numbers at the top, which are offset to the left, and I know exactly why. But I think, I don't know, it's appealing to look for the details and for these repetitive elements, because they're very appealing. The little additions of the numbers on the top just lighten it up, so it's a very strong, graphically strong image. And then you have these little round numbers at the top, of which there's so many on so many buildings in Bruges. And then I did look up what this building is actually, and because this is interesting to see. And this was a brewery at some point, interestingly enough, and it's not working anymore. And obviously it's very old, 75. So don't know if we have many houses in Water-on-Thames from that area, but it's just fascinating to see. So it's a story. It's the repetition, the graphic shapes, the triangles and squares, and then the rectangles rather, and the little round numbers that make it for me.
Yeah, and I love these little circulars with the eyebrows as well. There's lots going on, but it seems like we wanted to put something a little fun in, because there are these sort of characterful interludes, aren't there, around the city?
Yeah, so this is a question of basically engaging your 360-degree vision and being completely open and alert of what's going on around you. And you look up, you look into a window, and you see these funny characters here, like Marilyn Monroe on the right rather, and I spotted a few of those as well. This is one that Charlie spotted, but they're all around the city. So they're all little cameos, little stories, little things happening, and they're all part of the same, of this sort of what makes this city really, really fabulous to photograph. So it's one of those many elements, and there are quite a few of these sort of slightly humorous things that when we can spot them, that'll be really fun to integrate them into our little picture story.
Yeah, and it's important to go back with a little narrative, isn't it? A little background of the different character. And I know at this time of year, because the tour is in end of November until the beginning, it's 29th of November to the 2nd of December, I believe. Obviously, the Christmas lights are starting to come out, and it's going to be dark fairly early. So I know you enjoy your night photography, and is that something you get to do a little bit of in Bruges?
Yes, we do. So it's dark early. It's I don't know, it's dark by 5 o'clock or so. So we'll indulge in some low light and night photography. It's very easy. Obviously, we're based in the city center, and we can just walk around, and all the lights are up, all the Christmas lights are up, and it's just everything changes when lights come up. You know, you have reflections in shop windows, and there was water where there's a like a little market with a bridge over it. All the lamps reflect in the water. And the people reflect, the people that walk along all reflect in the water. So it's fascinating things that you can photograph at night. And this is just one example, this image here. It's just, there's only one position you can photograph it from, but I loved the way it sort of, it looked very Christmassy to me, and it just wanted to be photographed. And
yeah, it's snug.
make a
It
Christmas card or something.
invites you in, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it looks very sort of homely and very inviting.
And I know, and we're going to get to this now. There are that you do get outside the city a little bit, and there's a particular area which I know you're going to tell us about here. And these are some of the images that some people might have seen from Charlie and from yourself recently in the last few years. So tell us about this location, and we've got 2 or 3 from here to look at.
Yeah, so it's outside Bruges, it's up to the north, and all of these canals that we have in Bruges, they obviously lead on outside the city, and we're going to just take a short ride up north or northeast, and where we'll find some of these canals. And it's obviously the complete opposite. It's completely peaceful. It's obviously a man-made landscape, but it's just a place where we can just immerse ourselves and wait and let the landscape sort of come to us and kind of work on us, on our minds and our hearts, and then see how we can capture the mood. And you see, this is a blue sky. It was an early morning, but I think it lends itself to any kind of, so whatever weather we might have at that time of year. We have these tree lines along the canals, endless tree lines. The vistas are, some of them are straight for miles probably, and every now and then you have maybe a lonely figure on a bicycle coming towards you, and it takes about 10 minutes for them to actually arrive, and you can sort of take shots, maybe in the mist even, and so this person arrives sort of out of the mist along a tree-lined avenue, which is really great sort of makes for atmospheric shots. But so it's just a stone's throw from the city, and it'll give us a chance to have a little wander and just indulge in some pure landscape photography, tripods and all, long shutter speeds if we want, kind of almost the opposite of what we do in the city.
I think I just wanted to point out these very strong lines, and I suppose when you have this symmetry, I don't know about you, but whenever you can find these sorts of diagonals, it really adds some energy to the frame. So, and you can start to play with things disappearing off, and when you have mist as well, that can really all come together. So
yeah, I mean, it's quite likely that there is some mist because there's water there, and it's probably fairly cold at that time of year, so that it's likely that we'll have some mist, and we had some on that morning as well. But it makes the image quite sort of three-dimensional. So we can use these leading lines, we can use the long sort of avenues to make really images where you feel you can walk into. And the light is very low, so we have nice low side light, which really emphasizes the sort of three-dimensional nature of it, which will be lovely to do. I really look forward to that.
I wanted just to, as we show another one from this sort of area, I wanted to just talk about trees a little bit in winter, because a lot of us, we might shoot in autumn, for example. Obviously the color changing, and sometimes even spring's quite a nice time for different reasons. But how did you first find, trees in winter being bare? Was that a challenge at first?
Yeah, I never used to sort of care much for trees without leaves for some reason. So autumn color was the utmost I could do. You know, there's still color in the leaves on the trees, but actually in this particular location, I photographed there in summer when I was on this family trip, and when the trees are in leaf, they kind of disguise a lot of the leaves disguise a lot of the graphic nature and the structure of the trees, which just comes out when there are no leaves on them. So in late autumn and winter. And I found it worked particularly well here with these avenues and these sort of walkways and pathways. It just gives it a somehow it gives us a chance to sort of see through and really appreciate the trees as in their in the graphic nature that they are. When it's full of leaves, so I've grown to like now photographing trees without leaves, which I never used to. But I think in this location it just works really well, which is exactly why we're going at that time. Also, we're going to have probably quite a lot of reeds on the sides of the canals, which have a lovely sort of yellow color at the time, and really add to the this sort of the atmospheric feel of the place. And when they're green, when everything is green, it just doesn't have the same appeal. I at least in the summer I wasn't able to make any decent photographs.
Well, this is just, yes, these are little delicate punctuations, aren't they? And they just softly let us in. The way the light catches the top of these especially is lovely. And I think sometimes having just something to cushion the base of the frame is nice, especially when you have such a strong horizontal line here. But that's held up. It feels like this horizontal to me is holding all of this strength above it. And the way these just arch in is fab. So I very much enjoy this one. Astrid.
Yeah, this is it's grown on me actually over time. It's and it was just behind. Pierre here said it was in Damme. So Damme is the village near where these will be photographing. But this was just a little walk we did quite a way behind the village. I don't think we met any other person there. It's just one of those little bridges that crosses along. No living soul anywhere in the vicinity. So. We just had time to really just play with it, and the mist that came up was it just sort of added to the sort of this sort of wintry feel and the sort of slightly not exactly melancholic, but it's sort of very pastel colors and very sort of soft feel of the the place.
I know what you mean about the melancholic. There is a little quietness to it maybe. But and then we wanted to have this one because it's a slightly wider shot, obviously, and just indicative of the gorgeous light. You know, when in winter you do get this lovely, morning light, which is not too high, obviously, and this really allows you to see through. But I think, oh, excuse me, Astrid, there's been a bit of mouse action there. I think I really enjoyed the just little details here, the separation on these three. The fact these two are just sort of reaching out to touch each other, these little branches here, but there's enough space for them. So I would imagine actually that clarity in the sky, the fact there's really not actually much there at all, is probably beneficial for this, in my opinion. Do you agree?
Yeah, it was a completely nondescript sky first thing in the morning, very sort of pale and quite distracting in a way. So I was trying to move in sufficiently that it's just a smaller area, and the branches sort of moving in helped a little bit to cover it. But obviously I didn't want to close it completely because the branches would have all of messed with the ones on the other side. So I mean, the side light was just fabulous. You can see that the rays coming through there, which was just heavenly. I'm even just thinking about it now. I remember standing there, but in a way the sky, it kind of mirrors the slightly whitish, the appearance of the water as well, of the canal. So it's not quite symmetric, but it talks to, so that there are two whitish areas which kind of talk to each other, and then we have the two, the bits of the branches that are on opposite sides, and then the warmer colors at the bottom again. So there's three sets of kind of three sets of color really that talk to each other in that image.
Yeah.
I,
And I love the combination of curves that kind of talk to each other as well, and this straight line. But I won't drag everyone into a total deconstruction there. But just for time reasons, I
yeah.
could go into that. But actually, sorry, before we jump on, so Bruges, for anyone who is interested, Charlie and Astrid are running this. This is at the back end of November, like I say, 29th of November to the 2nd of December. So all the details on the Light and Land website for that, and there are I think just 2 places left actually, so that's very nearly full, that one. But let's just change tack, and Astrid, I'm sorry, I'll have to keep us moving a little, but if you can give me a spare 5 minutes at the end, we'll be okay. Don't like to rush everybody. We are off to York now, so totally different location, and obviously I'm going to ask the question, have you been to York, everybody? I suspect the vast majority of the UK people will have been, but let's ask the question just in case. And if you can just, again, Astrid, we talked about why Bruges, and there are some similar things to do with York, but I'm interested, because we've talked about this before, about your first photographic impressions of York and how you've had to kind of, sort of remap your mind to working with it.
Yeah, so York is, this is a day workshop we're going to do in November as well, later in the year. And I must say that I've been to York a number of times, and both on family trips and also on photographic sort of outings. And the first time I went there with the expectations that I'm going to get on the city wall and have a fabulous view of the Minster and nice panorama, cityscape kind of thing, skyline. And it just didn't happen. This is not what I found. And so I went back and back again several times, because I felt I have to work on my expectations of what I'm going to find there. And only once I was able to let go and say, okay, let's just go without any expectation of what I'm going to find. Then I was able to see ways of photographing it that were just kind of closed to me beforehand. So I think it's not, it's a fabulous city to photograph, but it's perhaps not what you would expect when you think I'm going to York and I'm have a fabulous skyline with a Minster in it, and that'll be that. So it's not as straightforward. We have to kind of find a different approach to it. And the last time I went, that worked really well, and we ran the workshop last year as well, which was really, really good. And so York, in a way, is similar to Bruges in that it's got a medieval city centre. It's got lovely old architecture. It's got narrow streets and alleyways, and obviously it's got the Minster, but it hasn't got the water. It's got the river, but not as much water as Bruges. But it has similarities in how we go about photographing it. And the way we found works really well is to build a narrative, to build a story of it, and looking for the different elements that make the character of the city. And that's really then allows us to build a story of the place, rather than coming back with that one shot of the skyline of it or something. So that's a really interesting way of photographing York.
Yeah, and this location that you start in, obviously, this is a very
Yeah, so
characterful.
this is in the museum gardens. It's the ruined abbey, and I've written down what it's St Mary's Abbey, and there's just a few ruins left. But it's a botanical garden as well now, and it's got the Museum of York, I think it's called, in it. So we'll just start off there and work our way then from there into the city, go through the gates and towards the Minster. But it's an interesting thing. A ruin can be very photogenic, obviously, but there are various little elements in those gardens that we can start off with, and then just move on from there. So,
And I think black and white is sometimes a nice way to deal with ruins and
exactly. I mean, it was a blue sky. It was a really nice sunny day, and black and white lent itself. I was lucky that there were a lot of pigeons on the ruin, and at some point they flew off. And as pigeons do, they sort of go in a circle, and I knew when they're going to land, I have to be ready. And I had the camera in my hand and just fired off a few shots when they landed. And I managed to get them in this kind of shape coming into to land again on the ruin, which was, I think, which worked quite well here in this instance.
Well, it's,
I
yeah,
cannot
it's
guarantee that they fly again in November, but you know,
yeah,
we can give it a try.
it's all about atmosphere, isn't it? And yeah, and if you have these sorts of places, it's quite nice to just add that little je ne sais quoi on the top there. I think we wanted to get into the view of the minster, and the fact I think I wanted to talk about here was that often in cities and smaller towns which are dominated by a very large cathedral or abbey or whatever it might be, a bit like St Albans in a way, Salisbury, Chester, even to some degree. Often you get little snippets of a view of the place, and that going on your point of the narrative there, that can be a nice way to deal with it photographically, because it's very rare that you can stand back and have a really good look at it. So is that something you find in York, and is it difficult to find, or do you have to then seek out the quieter, lesser walked spots to really frame the image in front of you?
Yeah, it's both really. So it's completely impossible to have a just a clear view of the Minster from anywhere. So there's a few places where you can get a reasonable view from quite a distance, but from the Roman the tower, what's it called now? I've forgotten the name. I'm very sorry to all people in York, but it'll probably come to me in a minute. And also from one of the city walls, quite a bit further away from the city centre, which we'll see later. But otherwise, if you're near it, there is no way you can sort of photograph it in its entirety. So views like this from one of the smaller streets really lend themselves to just picking out a detail. And when the light comes onto that side of the cathedral, which is in the afternoon, it wanders along the doorway and this sort of entrance, and gives us an opportunity to really pick out some details also. I mean, I stood quite close to the actual door, and the details of the stonework and the woods is really fabulous to pick out. Same way on the other side, there are some windows which, when it gets dark later, the light sort of streams out, and we can pick out those details. They're views that make up the whole story, and they allow us to sort of build our image of the city, without basically having a whole image available of the Minster. It's just not possible in York.
Yes, it's very much like a jigsaw, isn't it? Just bringing
Yeah,
in individual parts. And I love these little quiet streets, and often you can find in these cities and towns.
Clifford Tower. Paul just
Yes,
thank you,
you
Paul.
can find that there might be quite a busy thoroughfare, and actually just literally 20 yards off it, you can find a little bit of peace and quiet. But I want to just take us inside, Astrid, inside the Minster, because dealing with architect, especially religious places and centres, can be difficult to there's one way of dealing with it architecturally, but I like the fact we've got a couple of images here which we're just going to show you. You've dealt with this from the point of view of our layering up of images again. Why is that? Why did you choose to deal with it that way?
Yeah, it's similar to what I said about when we looked at the Bruges images. It's the many facets of the place, and I found it difficult to just capture it in one image. And by just combining them, so here we have a Bible verse that was the Bible was on the pulpit, and the statue of Mary and the child. I just found by combining them, it sort of really captured the spirit of the place for me. And the other thing is we can't really we can't take a tripod inside, so we have to do a bit of low light. We have to be a bit more creative and look for ways of photographing inside that are not the usual way of doing things. And so the two exposures again worked well for me, just to combine two of the details in there that for me just make up. They shout out, church or minster or cathedral, and same with the one of the cross and the lettering, which is obviously Bible texts. And so that's just one of those ways that I find you can still see what it is. As I mentioned, I really need to have that
Mm.
my images, but it just I find for me it captures the character of the place much better than just a straight shot of
Yeah.
either one or the other.
Yeah, interesting way to approach it, and that's something maybe to think about is when you are in places where it doesn't fit the obvious thing that we might normally do with our photography. It's just to completely come at it from a different point of view. And the great thing is there's no right or wrong when you're shooting digital. You can take that all back with you and have a think about it and have a play with it. But capturing the spirit of the place is always the challenge. And we wanted to have this little fun one in because this is presumably inside. That the
Yes, it
dog's
is.
man's
Yeah,
best friend.
yeah. It's we spotted it during the last workshop, and it's on one of the stone slabs of some important person or other, and that's his dog. So
Did Charlie spot that by any chance?
yes, he did. Yeah, he did. He did. He was
He's got a
right.
dog radar that goes for
I
miles.
know, I know. So but I couldn't let go without actually having a go myself at the picture, at laughing it. So, but yeah,
No, it's nice, and those little details, could keep you busy when you start looking at the carvings and everything else that can be inside some of these places. You could spend all afternoon just dealing with the little macro shots. But I wanted to just spend a few minutes, Astrid, talking about the little tucked away sort of ye olde York, for want of a slightly less patronising phrase. So apologies to everybody's there, but a lot of people may know that there's some sort of narrow alleyways and this characterful sort of shooting that you can do at night or in the twilight hours. So tell us a little bit more about that, because I know you enjoy this, and because you do your night workshop in London as well, which I know is slightly different, but it's similar vibe in a way.
yeah. I do like low light and night photography, and again, it's later in the year, so it will be dark quite early. And in these little alleyways, it will be particularly dark. So even at 4 o'clock or 4:30, this will be dark and the lights will be on. So we can photograph this basically in daylight hours, unless the sun is shining. It might be slightly different then, but it might be quite likely to be an overcast and drab day, perhaps, and then we can see exactly that. But these little alleyways was one of the things that I discovered when I looked for a different approach. And York has quite a lot of them. And at some point, a person coined them the Snickelways. And I can tell you more about that if you want to come on my workshop, how he came about. And there's about 60 or so of them. And I walked the whole route, which is 7 or 8 miles, and discovered all these little alleyways. And some of them are fairly quiet. They're off main busy streets, but hardly anybody walks through them. So you can set up your tripod there and, take your time and think you're completely out of town in the middle of nowhere, because there's simply nobody walking through them, or very, very few people. So that's some fun we can have. And with these ones, obviously, I did love the light and the light in the window, the lamp, and this sort of mysterious feel that night gives. Has to be black and white for me. There's no question about it. But yeah, so these little alleyways and so-called snickelways are typical of York, and we will look at several of them.
I love the fact that this just sort of, oh, excuse me, this just goes to sort of dark here. We don't quite know what's down that alleyway. There's sort of a slight worry about what might be down there in my mind.
That's the idea. That's the idea. Yeah. So it
Yeah.
leads to the darkness and into the distance, and you don't know what's coming.
And there
But
can be sometimes people can be tempted to try and pull detail out of shadow. It's something we have talked about on here before, but we mustn't be afraid to let shadows and dark areas be dark, because they have their
yeah,
own role to play sometimes.
absolutely, absolutely. It would completely destroy the mystery of the place. I like it when you have questions in an image. Where does it lead to? What is in that corner? And if you answer them, it loses some of its mystery. It loses some of its appeal. Really, doesn't make you want to come back and investigate. So black
Yeah.
shadows should be black. Completely agree.
I think what might happen in the end of that corner is probably a nasty end, perhaps, but not on the workshop, obviously.
Not, no, 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 no,
No.
no.
But no,
I would
in
never
your
do
mind,
that.
you've got 18th century London or whatever. But
Yeah,
I,
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think the other thing I would just point out, sometimes we can be tempted that condition, and it can be the same with any condition. It could be great light, it could be amazing, something happening in front of you, or it could be the atmosphere of this. Everything still has to work compositionally. It still has to be strong, and you can see how Astrid's done that really with the lines, and it's just attention to every tiny little bit of detail here at the edges, and the lovely light being caught from here. So yeah, like I say, sometimes something catches you and you think, oh, that's great atmosphere. That's not enough. It still has to work compositionally, which I think Astrid's done really well here in
Yeah,
using
so
that.
I squashed myself onto the wall to be able to sort of arrange the windows in that way.
Yeah, and that's what you've got to do, and so that's what.
Webs and all, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, brush the coat down. Um,
exactly.
but we wanted to finish with a bit of a hero shot, as it were, of the Minster, because you've said very eloquently that it's difficult, like a lot of these are, when they're crammed in these towns, because things get built around them. In the old days, there probably would have been flat land in front of it, and you would have seen it for miles away, and that was part of the vibe, wasn't it? But you have found a little spot to have a look here, and late afternoon, presumably, you get some lovely light on that in this time of year.
Yeah, so we were quite lucky actually. That was last year during our workshop, and also the day before when I was there. But in the afternoon, if the sun comes out, it hits the Minster, and from the position where we were on the wall, this is where you can see it. And Charlie and I ran this workshop last year, and we dragged the group up onto the wall, the little walk, 10-15 minutes, and then the clouds sort of came along, and it was sort of one of these sort of moments where I thought, oh my God, we've walked all the way now, and now the clouds. But anyway, we spotted a little gap in the clouds, and I thought, okay, 5 minutes, and it'll happen if it doesn't sort of close on. And luckily, those 5 minutes passed, and although we were almost about to turn back, the sun came through this gap in the clouds, and it just hits the Minster and produces this golden view of the Minster, which is just it's fabulous. And so we were really lucky to have that, and we'll keep an eye on that when we're there. Obviously there are other positions where we can try and catch some of it, but that's sort of the juicy shot from one of the city walls, where we can just capture this afternoon light falling onto the Minster. And we have some roofs and stuff in front of it, but
Well, I was going to mention that, because actually just two things, and before we wrap up on this particular one, that gold and that gold, amber, whatever, and deep blues, those inky blues, those grey late blues, if there's sort of a bit of rain up in the sky sometimes on clouds, can be such glorious things to play with, because that gold really just pops forward as the blue sort of comes back and recedes. And actually that's something we talked about with Sue Bishop in the Wildflowers of Wengen, is thinking about colours receding or coming forward. But I love the fact that you've got the roofs and the rest of and that little tree down there, because it sits within its location, and it's not only is it difficult practically to get it out of that, but it needs to live within its location, because that's what its object was, to be amongst the people and everything else. So I actually really like the fact that we can see the rest of a little bit of that urban scape around it.
yeah, it's the only way to do it. That's one thing. And as we know, we've discussed, so York everything is narrow, everything is very close to the Minster, so it just exactly sits in the middle there, and so you get that. But it's okay. Also, I like the colors of the roofs and things. So the reddish, bright, warm colors I find their complement. They kind of carry the golden light on the Minster quite nicely, I think. So yeah, we will try and order this light again for this year.
And we'll get a light and land flag flying up there if we can
Yeah,
next time, Astrid, as well.
Oh yeah, that'd be fun.
Come on, sort it out. Okay, fab. Well, I will bring us just to a little end there on York and on Bruges. And Astrid, thank you very much for your time, as ever.
Yeah,
It's always good to chat.
Yeah, great stuff.
And if anyone wants to see those, if you jump on the Light and Land website, you can either find them through the locations, or if you just go to the tutor page, you can see Astrid, and you can see all of Astrid's upcoming workshops. So do check those out. Tiny bit of housekeeping just to finish with. What's coming up next is Holland / the Netherlands / Kingdom of the Netherlands, or Kingdom of Netherlands. That is next Tuesday with Sue Bishop and Charlotte Bellamy. So there's going to be 3 of us on that call, which is quite a nice atmos. And then the week after that, and this is what I mentioned earlier, we're going to do this creative interpretation. So what we're asking is we want your raw files. We would like you to send us a couple of raw files, and we're going to have a Dropbox link, which I'm going to post after the live stream in the comments, and I'll do a separate post on the Light and Land page with the file folder. So there's a URL, you can go to that folder, you can drop in your raws, and I'll put the instructions about how to do that and how to label them so we know who they are as well. And if you can get those in this week, that would be fab, so Adrian and I can get ahead a little bit on that. So hopefully we'll show you 2 different approaches to how to take an image edit, because there are no right and wrong answers on that. So that might be quite interesting. Good. All right. Well, thank you everybody for staying with us again every week, Tuesday nights, 8 p.m. You know where we are. And thank you once again to Astrid, and I shall speak to you all.
Thanks to you.
Oh, my pleasure. I shall see you soon, and I shall speak to everyone else next week.